You lost that love and feeling. Whoa, that love and feeling.
Yes, I have.
You've lost that love and feeling. Now it's gone, gone, gone. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 236. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week, and thank you for joining me if you're new to the show. This is our variety show week. That means we've got content from the whole cast. We've got Mia Anstein, who is our resident hunting guide, Sergeant Bill Sylvia, a masterclass competitive shooter, and Pastor John Bennett, who pontificates about ethics, theology, and culture. But as I mentioned last week, Pastor Bennett was under the weather. He wasn't able to join me last week. He's still not feeling well, so please continue to keep him in your prayers as he is recovering. So today we have a ballistic minute from Sergeant Bill and a new motivation from Mia Anstein. But before I turn the show over to these awesome people, let me take a moment to thank the men and women who make this show possible, the members of what we call the Reformation Gun Club. This week I want to give out a special shout out to John, to Kurt from Ennis, Montana, to Mark from Woodland, Washington, Robert from Bothell, Washington, Diane from Gulf Breeze, Florida, Gordon, John from Wheaton, Illinois, Kevin from Fairfax, Missouri, Luke from Seymour, Indiana, and Matthew from Nixa, Missouri. Thank you all so much for your support. Armed Lutheran Radio is listener funded, and that means that we don't have any advertising, we don't have any sponsors. We rely on the generosity of the members of the Reformation Gun Club to help keep the lights on. Members get early access to the show every week, some cool swag, access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content released every week just for members. We don't release hundreds of hours every week. We release new content every week for our members, and you get invitations to our monthly online hangouts, one of which is coming up soon, as I mentioned last week. We didn't get to get together last month because of all the craziness going on with my house. I am finally back in my home after 3 months. It's been 4 for the rest of my family. And I'm in my home studio, which makes it a lot easier. So we are going to get together again here in the next week or two and enjoy an evening of fun and merriment. And you can be one of those people. Just check out armedlutheran.us/gun club or look for a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. And come join us for as little as $1 a month. We would appreciate your support. All right, before I turn things over to Mia and Sergeant Bill, I do want to address an email from a listener who decided he wanted to call me to task for something that I addressed in episodes 235 and 233. This is from longtime listener and first-time emailer Russ. And Russ makes some really interesting and important points that I wanted to address. And wouldn't you know, the first time that Russ decides to send me an email, he's taking me to task. But that's okay. That's really cool. As you'll hear here, I really do appreciate the points that Russ is making in this email. Russ writes, I listened to episode 233 where you gave your opinions of the actions of Kyle Rittenhouse and how wrong he was. This was given out a week after the incident. In episode 235, your opinion of the press overreacting and not waiting 72 hours for the facts and how wrong the press was. Maybe one should reflect on themselves before sharing an opinion. I wasn't in Kenosha, and I'm not a judge, nor did I stay in a Holiday Inn. Not sure if Kyle was right or wrong, but I didn't appreciate the fact that you spent more time criticizing Kyle than the known socialists that were rioting, burning buildings that people could possibly have been in, and no doubt committing criminal offenses. When you make judgments on what Kyle was thinking, aren't you placing yourself above where you should? In defense of you, politics and religion are a dangerous subject for any broadcaster. Just like I discussed above, this is just my opinion, right or wrong, and the conclusions not decided by me, but I don't broadcast my opinion to thousands like you do. The best part of this is that we live in a free democratic republic and have the right to disagree on a viewpoint. This is just my humble opinion and this one subject. And don't misunderstand, I very much enjoy the podcast and I look forward to it weekly. Fortunately, I think we both agree that it's nice to disagree without getting vicious and degrading. I'm getting off my soapbox as it just looks ridiculous since they have been produced from cardboard. Russ, first-time emailer, long-time listener. I hope your house is coming together and you can move back in. See you on the interwebs. Stay safe. Stay strong. All right, Russ, thank you so much. I really do appreciate the email and your support, and thank you for listening. This is an excellent email for a number of reasons. First, the first thing I want to sort of address in reverse order. Do you remember the episode, if you're a long-time listener, or it really hasn't been that long ago, in episode 221, our OK Karen episode, a longtime listener to my other podcast, Unload and Show Clear, decided he was going to unsubscribe from that podcast because he disagreed with me about something. Russ here is being an adult, and he rightly points out that we live in a free republic where we can agree or disagree and still be friends. I mean, it seems like common sense to me, and unfortunately, it's kind of a refreshing change from what we see going on in society, where people simply will not tolerate opinions that they disagree with. Will, who was the listener that I responded to in episode 221, unsubscribed from my podcast about IDPA because he disagreed with something that I said on Armed Lutheran Radio. That's childish. And Russ here is being very, very responsible, and I really do appreciate his points. So let me respond to his point now about Kyle Rittenhouse, specifically our reactions to Kyle's actions and the rioters who were also involved. Let me make it clear, first and foremost, if you didn't hear that episode, that would be the Kenosha Kid episode number 233, that we were not being critical of Kyle's use of force in self-defense. Once he was attacked, he was perfectly justified in using deadly force to defend his life. And I think we made that clear. And I think we also made it clear what we thought of the people that he shot. Now, the point that we were trying to make was that he placed himself in a situation where he was prepared to use lethal force to defend property, to defend stuff. And that is a position that we have held consistently for years, that defending property with lethal force is not morally justifiable. It's a bad idea in terms of what it can mean for you personally. It's a bad idea morally. And the purpose of the episode was not to be critical or not to compare the people involved in that shooting. The point was how Kyle Rittenhouse was being treated and continues to be treated on the right and in 2A circles and 2A media. The main reason that we're critical and the main reason that we don't like this idea of defending stuff with lethal force is that he could easily have been killed defending property. Worse yet, he could have been killed defending property that wasn't even his. And if he had not been so, and we pointed this out, amazingly judicious in his use of force. Notice that despite the fact that he's in the midst of this riot, the only people he shot were the people who were attacking him. That is really remarkable. But had he not been so judicious in that use of force, he could easily be facing life in prison for shooting, wounding, killing someone else, some bystander. Now, as we pointed out, he's been overcharged for the shootings, and he will or should walk, which is going to create a whole nother sensational craziness, probably more rioting. But the fact is that he's facing murder charges right now because he chose to be at a violent protest to protect property. And I don't care who the people were that he shot, it's not smart. And the problem that Pastor Bennett and I had with this, and the reason for the episode, was because Kyle Rittenhouse was and continues to be held up as some kind of patriot and hero by the 2A community simply because of who his victims were. And morally, I can't go along with that. He was absolutely justified in using force to defend his life. I don't care who he shot. The people who attacked him, even if they had been Amish, I don't care. If they had decided, because they tried to attack him and use deadly force against him, he was absolutely justified in doing it. The problem was he chose to be there and risked life and imprisonment and the impoverishment of his family through the paying of legal fees, which he's going to be paying through the nose, simply to defend property that was not his. And that was our point. This was not a smart decision to be there in the first place. His use of force when he had to do it was amazing, was really remarkable. But he should never have been there in the first place. And that was the point that we were trying to make. Now, the other point that Russ makes here that I think is really important is about the 72-hour rule that he mentions. I mentioned it last week. John Correa from Active Self-Protection has this rule he calls the 72-hour rule. And the point is that you shouldn't comment on any kind of use of force incident for at least 72 hours so that more facts can come out, because usually 99% of the time, the initial reports, the facts that you get from the media are completely wrong. And admittedly, I did not initially adhere to that rule with regards to Kyle Rittenhouse when the first news came out. I heard the news. I heard the report about him, the bringing a gun across the state line and all this stuff, that all these things that turned out to be not true. And I mentioned in episode 233 that my opinion of him had changed once I learned more. My point last week was that politicians and the mainstream media are quick to make judgments without all the facts, but that we on the right do the same thing. And I want to say, if I came across in last week's show like I was preaching to everyone else, like that didn't apply to me, I want to sincerely apologize for that and ask for your forgiveness. I am as guilty of this as everyone else. We all jump to conclusions when the news story fits our personal biases. And to my great shame, I am not immune from that either. And if I was coming across in last week's episode like I'm preaching to you and that I'm above all of that, I am not. Everyone is guilty of this. When the news comes out, we should all, myself included, should be more careful and wait before we form an opinion. That, again, is, I think, why it was on my mind last week with regards to that story about the lady at the football game who was supposedly tased and arrested for not wearing a mask. That's not why she was tased and arrested, but go back and listen to that episode, you'll understand. We all jump to these conclusions, We, myself included, like to point out the failings of the left-leaning media and politicians when they make judgments without all the facts. But we on the right and in the 2A community, myself included, are prone to doing the same thing. Russ, thank you so much for this email. I really do appreciate your candid criticism, and I thank you for the way you handled it. I really wish more people in society today could handle disagreements and differences of opinion in the responsible way that you did it. Thank you so much for this email. Blessings to you, and thank you for listening. Folks, if you've got a comment, if you have a question about or a difference of opinion about something that we've said on the show, and you'd like to share that, or if you have a suggestion for a topic that you'd like to hear us discuss, visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback, just like Russ did, and leave us a message. We would love to hear from you and to respond to you on the show. Thank you again, Russ. I appreciate it. Okay, that's all for me today. Time to check out what's happening with Mia and Sergeant Bill. I will talk to you again next week. Hopefully, Pastor Bennett will be with us. Please continue to pray for him. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Time now for Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstein.
Hey guys, it's Mia here visiting with you again. These are indeed crazy times, and I'm sure that you know that, I know that, we all know that things can get crazier by the day. I mean, just when you think that it can't get any more insane, something else crazy happens, right? So today I want to talk to you about a few things that are happening in the United States, and it's something that I'm directing toward parents, which I am a parent, and my daughter, she is finishing her last year of college. Thank goodness. She is surviving that endeavor. But I want to talk to those of you who have children in school. And also, if you don't have kids in school, but you are working from home and you're doing some type of teleconference meetings via Zoom or other GoToMeeting or something like that, I want to talk to you about that, because these meetings are important and you need to be professional during the meetings. Just like with an in-person meeting, there is etiquette and there are things to think about. And one of those things is your background and your set. And you also, I mean, there's other technical issues, maybe lighting and audio and stuff like that, but that's not what I want to visit with you about. I am today reading an article on ammoland.com, and the headline is "School Suspends Student Over BB Gun in His Own Bedroom. Provokes Widespread Backlash." This is not the first headline that I have seen of this sort. It's not the first time that there is a student at home who is doing class and a teacher spots some type of supposed firearm or weapon in the background of the student's screen. So when we're looking at our setups at home, you need to consider the background. I'm a hunter. There are people in some of my meetings who may not be inclined to like taxidermy. And there are people who maybe aren't inclined to like firearms. These are things that we need to consider when we're having these meetings. When you set up your workspace or your child's workspace, think of these things. Think of the background and what's there. In this article, they talk about how the student's taking a test, the teacher's overseeing the student via electronic means, via video, and a brother walks by and trips over an unloaded BB gun and then props it up. So here is another issue. Okay, it's not just the issue about his background, but we should be teaching our kids proper firearm handling. proper firearm safety and storage. There's another article that I read about a similar thing, and this young man in the other article had his BB gun hanging on a little gun rack on the wall behind him. He had it stored safely. It wasn't just laying on the ground for his brother to trip over. And granted, yeah, okay, it's just a BB gun, but these are ways that we can teach proper gun safety. We can practice trigger control. We can practice the 4 rules of firearm safety. And we should be doing that as parents. One thing that I want to encourage you, if you can and you have the time, is look into homeschooling your children. Look into the educational facilities that are going to be embracing your child and teaching them throughout their school years. Because when my daughter was in school, I live in a very conservative area, and there were people in the school, teachers, that were trying to tell my daughter lies. They were trying to brainwash her. And this is what's happening to our kids across the country. So if you're a parent and you have a school-age child, sit down with them, visit with them, communicate with them, have conversations with them. Open-ended questions help conversation. So don't just say, "How was your class today?" Because what are you going to get from that? "Oh, fine." Yeah, that's what I would say too. "How are you?" "I'm good." Ask open-ended questions. What did you study in class today? Do you have any questions about what your teacher was telling you today? They may be like, "Yeah, my teacher was saying that the 9/11 was a conspiracy that was put on by our government and didn't really happen." Do you think that would catch your attention? Because that is actually what they're teaching. They're teaching it in your elementary schools, your middle schools, your high schools, and in college. So right now we're seeing all this chaos in our country, and we're wondering, how can these people be doing this? How are these young people doing this and they don't understand? Well, this is why. It's because the parents weren't present. They weren't communicating. They didn't know what was being taught to their children. You need to be there and you need to know what's going on. So that is one message that I want to give you. And it may sound a little overboard, but it really isn't. We have to be the ones to guide our children, and we have to help them understand what reality is, not just in what they're learning at school, but also in teaching them safety and responsibility at home. So those BB guns, I've mentioned them in a prior episode, they can be great things, but don't let that be the thing that's caught in the background. Maybe you can take your youngster's BB gun and lock it in the safe with your guns and, teach them proper gun handling and safety through one item, and let that be a good learning lesson for us all. Pay attention, handle what you can handle, and manage what you can manage. Prevent issues before they happen. And I will be talking to you next time with a firearm review that some of you may be interested in. So talk to you next time. Bye, guys.
You can read more from Mia, watch her YouTube videos, or check out her podcast, Mac Outdoors with Mia and Leah, at miaandstein.com. Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today I want to talk to you about, the question that I always get asked by everybody that shoots competition that I talk to. They always ask, what modifications have you done to your gun? So when it comes to modifying your competition guns or your carry guns, some people do that. I don't do much except for maybe like sights, red dot, something like that to a carry gun. But a competition gun, yeah, you're shooting it for competition, so why not do some modifications if it's going to make you better at shooting and make you enjoy the competition more? But you have to ask yourself, are you making modifications just for modification's sake, or are you making modifications that have advantages that are going to make you better or make it easier? Because all modifications are going to either have advantages or disadvantages. sometimes both. So let's talk about the disadvantages. Sometimes when you modify your competition gun, say you dramatically reduce the trigger weight on your pistol, let's, for example, say a Glock pistol, and you get used to running that shorter, lighter, faster trigger, and it's not your carry gun, then you go to shoot your carry gun, you're not going to be as good as you think you are because you're not used to that heavier, longer trigger. This really boils down to just a training issue, so you need to train with both of your guns. If your competition gun and your carry gun are different, put them both in the rotation when you practice and dry fire and live fire, and you'll be good and proficient with both of them. Now, when you modify your competition guns, a lot of times the more modifications you make equals more problems, and the guns get more finicky. The historically grand champion of this is the 1911. So in 1911, in its original government profile form, is actually a pretty simple gun. It runs pretty well. It's when you start changing the trigger and changing the springs and changing the fitment and all these things that start to add up and start to make the gun have problems and not feed or just not run right. You could do the same thing with a Glock. Glocks are known for their very rugged reliability, and if you start changing trigger springs and connectors and recoil springs, and the one that's the worst, the striker spring, also known as a firing pin spring, you start messing with that and the delicate balance of the trigger return spring and the recoil spring and that firing pin or striker spring to get a shorter, lighter trigger, and then the gun starts giving you light primer strikes and a Glock that chokes, which is kind of an oxymoron. So the more you mess with it, the more problems it has. And half the time when you start doing all these different things, you spend more time trying to figure out what the problem is and figure out a solution to a seemingly random malfunction problem, and it just is maddening. I'll be the first one to say that I don't like a lot of the Glock factory triggers, although I have a Glock 19 Gen 5 that pretty much out of the box is got a really good trigger for a Glock. It's not a really good trigger compared to a lot of other guns, but it's pretty dang good for a Glock. So basically what I'm saying is there comes a point where you need to determine whether your modifications are giving you advantages or disadvantages. Now, those advantages would be making you faster, better sights. You can get a quicker, more accurate sight picture, a quicker cycling gun for whatever ammunition you're using. So like my competition guns, I tend to put lighter recoil springs in them because they cycle better and they run better and they recoil and flip less. If you do any kind of things to make your gun more accurate, putting in an aftermarket barrel or something like that, that could be an advantage as long as it runs and it works well. The advantages should be things that make your pistol easier to use. So more ergonomic controls, shorter, lighter triggers without getting crazy and trying to get the shortest, lightest trigger you possibly can. One of the best advantages and modifications you can make to your guns are to get better ergonomics. So making the grip better, whether it's putting a back strap on or taking one off or putting texture on it or skateboard tape, adjusting the trigger reach and or feel of the trigger. Some guns feel better with flat triggers than they do with curved triggers. Changing the weight balance of the gun, so putting, say, a tungsten guide rod in it or a grip weight or a heavy mag well or something like that, so that it balances the gun better. It's not nose heavy, it's not heel heavy. Maybe it makes the recoil much more manageable and the muzzle flip much more manageable and less. These are advantages. These are great things you can do to a competition gun or maybe even a carry gun if you feel the need to do so, to make them more shootable, to make them more comfortable and just easier to use. That's what all the modifications you should be doing to your guns, if you do any at all, should be, to make it easier and better for you to use. So whether you've got a box stock Glock 17 and you change the sights so you have better sights on it and leave it as is, or you've got a SIG Legion X5 that you've put a tungsten guide rod in and different recoil springs and a different profile trigger pad. Whatever you may do, make sure that they are advantages for your shooting and not disadvantages. They need to be easier and better than they were before and not causing more problems. One of my favorite quotes from an old samurai, Miyamoto Musashi, was, "Weapons should be hardy, not decorative." Basically what that means is you should be Gucciing up your Glock. It should be functional and do what it needs to do. It doesn't need to be pretty. It's a tool, so make it functional. Don't worry about the aesthetics of it. Because when it comes down to it, nobody really cares what your gun looks like except for you. I'm Sergeant Bill. This has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Force and a masterclass competitive shooter. You can check out his YouTube videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.